My daughter Ellen interrupted me on a Tuesday evening last April. I had called her and I was doing what I always did, the preamble before the ask, the softening layer that came automatically before I had even named what I needed. Ellen, I'm so sorry to call. I know you're probably busy with the kids. This is probably something I can figure out on my own, but I was wondering if maybe at some point when you have a chance. She interrupted me. She said, Mom, you can just ask me. I stopped. I sat with that for a moment. And then I said the plain thing, without the disclaimer, without the advance apology for the fact of my need. I need help with my prescriptions. The dosages changed and I can't make sense of the chart. She said, I'll come Saturday. That was it. 20 seconds. I had been managing toward that 20-second exchange for most of my adult life. I'm 90 years old. I have been a nurse, a wife, a mother, a widow. I have spent the better part of 9 decades treating my own existence as something that needed to be apologized for before it could be acknowledged. I did not know I was doing this. I thought I was being considerate. I thought the apology before the ask was a form of love. What happened after Ellen's 4 words? How I began to see the pattern they had named and what it had cost me across a lifetime. And what changed when I finally stopped is what I want to tell you. I need to tell you where the pattern came from because it did not begin with me. Patterns like this never begin with the person carrying them. I was the second of 4 children in a household that was, by any fair description, exhausted. My mother was a loving woman who was also a woman running a family on a budget that did not accommodate mistakes, in a house that was always slightly too small, with a husband who worked long hours and came home tired and needed the evenings to recover. She was not cruel. She was overwhelmed. And the message I absorbed from watching her, the way children absorb things before they have language for them, was that adding to the weight of what was already heavy was something to be avoided at all costs. I learned to soften my needs before I stated them, to preface the ask with evidence that I understood it was an ask, that I knew someone was being inconvenienced, that I would not have asked if I could help it, that I was sorry for the imposition before the imposition had been named. By the time I was 10, I was doing this automatically. By the time I was 20, it was invisible to me, the way your own accent is invisible to you until someone from somewhere else hears you speak. I became a nurse in 1957. I want to tell you about nursing in that era because it is directly relevant to what I'm describing. Nursing in 1957, particularly hospital nursing, which is what I did for 35 years, was organized around a specific idea of what a nurse was. An instrument of care, present and competent, whose own needs and opinions and personhood were subordinate to the function. We were not supposed to disagree with doctors. We were not supposed to draw attention to ourselves as people rather than as nurses. We were supposed to be there when needed and invisible when not. I was good at this. I was very good at it. The qualities the pattern had built in me were exactly the qualities the role rewarded: attentiveness to others' needs, the effacement of my own, the ability to make people comfortable with my presence by making my presence as undemanding as possible. Nursing gave me 35 years of professional reinforcement for something that had been wrong in me since childhood. When I married Robert in 1961, I brought all of this with me. Robert was a good man. I want to say that clearly, because what I'm about to describe is not about him being difficult or demanding. He was neither. He was a decent, steady man who did not require me to apologize for my needs, who would have been surprised to know I was doing it, who simply received the apologize for version of me as the version I was. He never said, "Miriam, you don't have to preface everything." He never noticed the preamble, because to him, the preamble was just how I spoke. And so I gave him 55 years of myself filtered through the softening layer. And he knew me through that layer. And I sometimes wonder, I have wondered this often since Ellen's 4 words, what he would have made of the unfiltered version. He died in 2016. He was 78. In the year after his death, I was not thinking about patterns or layers or the way I had been inhabiting my own life. I was thinking about Robert. Grief is not a time for self-examination. It is a time for grief, and I gave it what it required. What I can tell you is that the pattern did not pause for the grief. In the months after Robert died, as my daughters came and went, and neighbors stopped by, and the infrastructure of a widowed person's life assembled itself around me, I apologized for every need that arose. I apologize for being a burden during a difficult time. I apologize for needing rides to appointments. I apologize for calling when Ellen was with her children. I apologized once for asking Joanne to stay an extra hour when I was not feeling well, even though the asking was entirely appropriate and Joanne was glad to stay and said so. I apologize for being the kind of person who had needs. The grief had not interrupted the pattern. If anything, the grief had deepened it. My neighbor Connie is 85. She lives 3 houses down, and we have been neighbors for 22 years, which is long enough to know someone's patterns, whether or not you have named them. Connie is direct in a way I have always found slightly startling. She asks for what she needs without preamble, states her opinions without disclaimer, calls when she wants to talk without apologizing for the call. For years, I thought of this as a small social roughness, a failure of the softening instinct. I see now that I had it exactly wrong. Connie said something to me once, years before Ellen's call, that I stored somewhere and failed to understand for a long time. She said, "Miriam, I've never understood why people apologize for calling. If the other person doesn't want to hear from you, they don't have to pick up." I had nodded and thought privately that this was a slightly uncharitable view of social obligation. What I understand now is that Connie was describing the simplest possible relationship with one's own existence. I am here. I have a need. I will say so. The apology is not love. The apology is the assumption that your presence requires justification. After Ellen said, "You can just ask me," I sat in my kitchen for a while before I called her back with the plain question about the prescriptions. I sat with the 4 words and I let them do what they were doing, which was naming something I have been carrying for so long. I had stopped knowing I was carrying it. What I felt sitting there was not relief. not immediately. What I felt first was something closer to embarrassment. The specific embarrassment of seeing a thing about yourself that had been visible to others while remaining invisible to you. Ellen has said it gently, without reproach, but the gentleness didn't prevent me from understanding that she had seen the pattern, that she had probably been seeing it for years, that my daughters have been receiving the apologized for version of their mother's needs for as long as they could remember. And this had apparently been going on long enough that Ellen had decided on a Tuesday evening in April to say something about it. Ellen came on Saturday. We sat at the kitchen table with the prescription chart and the pharmacy printout, and we went through it together. This sounds ordinary. What was not ordinary was the texture of the interaction, the quality of it, which was different from the usual quality of Ellen coming to help. Normally, when Ellen came in response to one of my asks, there was a layer in the exchange that I had always thought of as warmth, but which I now understood was something more complicated, the layer of reassurance. Ellen reassuring me that asking was fine, that she was glad to come, that it was no trouble. Me telling her I knew it was a lot to ask, thanking her more than the situation required, managing her possible discomfort with the imposition before she had expressed any. Two people spending energy on the frame around the thing instead of the thing. This time, we sat down and looked at the chart. I pointed to the part I didn't understand. Ellen explained it. I asked a follow-up question. She answered. We had a cup of tea. She left. The whole interaction was 15 minutes shorter than usual and felt paradoxically like more contact, as if something had been cleared out of the way, and we were actually in the room together, rather than each of us managing our side of a negotiation neither of us had agreed to hold. In the weeks after that Saturday, I began to notice the pattern in real time. Once named, it was everywhere. In every phone call, every errand, every interaction with the doctor's office or the pharmacy or the woman at the grocery store who helped me reach something on the upper shelf. I caught myself starting sentences with, "I'm so sorry to bother you," and stopping, removing the apology, saying the plain thing. It was uncomfortable in a way I had not anticipated. Like removing a coat you've worn so long you've forgotten you're wearing it and finding out the wind is cold. The discomfort was instructive. It told me how load-bearing the apology had been. I had been using it as a kind of social insurance. If I apologized sufficiently before asking, then the asking could not be held against me. If I preemptively acknowledged the imposition, I was protected from the accusation of being an imposition. The apology was not just a verbal habit. It was a strategy, a way of making myself small enough that my presence could not be refused. And I had been running this strategy for so long in so many contexts that I had come to experience it as a personality trait rather than a fear response. I thought I was a considerate person. I was a frightened one. In the summer, I told Connie what I had been thinking about. We were in her garden on a July afternoon, the kind of afternoon where sitting outside is the only reasonable thing to do. And I told her about Ellen's call and the 4 words and what I had been noticing since. Connie listened without interrupting, which is not always her way. And when I finished, she said, "Miriam, I've been watching you apologize for things for 20 years. I always wondered when you'd stop." She said it with the directness that is simply her nature and without cruelty. And I found I was not hurt by it. I was grateful. It confirmed what I had been understanding, that the pattern was visible to the people around me in a way it had never been visible to me, and that they had been receiving it, receiving the apologize for Miriam in place of the actual one. Robert came back into my thinking then. Robert, who had been with me for 55 years and who had known me through the layer, who had received my needs in their apologize for form, and who had never said, "Miriam, you don't have to do that." Not because he was unkind. He was not. But because the apologize for version of me was the version he knew, and it did not occur to him to wonder if there was another one. I gave him 55 years of the managed presentation, and he loved me through it. And I was glad to have been loved. And I also thought he never got to see me plainly. I never gave him that. And I don't know how different things would have been if I had. The cost of the pattern is not only the cost to me. That is what I understood in the summer and could not have told you the year before. When you apologize before asking, you are not only diminishing yourself, you are also diminishing the person you're asking, preventing them from offering something freely, requiring them to reassure you before they can help, making the help into a negotiation when it could have been a gift. I have been doing this to everyone who loved me for 60 years and calling it consideration. It was, in fact, a way of controlling the interaction from a position of preemptive smallness, ensuring that nothing could be given to me cleanly because I had muddied the giving in advance. One afternoon in October, I was sitting in the living room with nothing particular to do and no particular reason to be content. And I noticed that I was simply sitting there, not managing the fact of my presence, not organizing a justification for taking up the chair, the room, the afternoon, just here. 90 years old, in my living room, on an October afternoon, taking up exactly the space I require and not apologizing for it. The noticing of it was brief and quiet, and it was one of the more significant moments of the past year. Let me tell you what I think the apologizing for existing pattern actually is. Underneath its particular verbal form, the "I'm so sorry to call," and the "I know this is probably nothing," and the "I hate to ask but," it is the assumption that your presence requires justification. That before you can take up space in a conversation, in a room, in someone else's attention, you must first establish that the space you are taking up is not being wasted on you, that you are not an imposition, that your need is legitimate enough to be stated. This assumption, once it is in you, runs constantly. It runs in the grocery store and the doctor's office and the phone call with your daughter and the conversation with the neighbor and the quiet afternoon in your own living room. It is not a social habit. It is a posture toward your own existence. And the posture says, I am not certain I am welcome here. I am not certain I have earned the right to simply be. I am 90 years old. And I have been carrying that posture since I was a child, watching my mother manage an exhausted household. And for 80 some years, I did not know I was carrying it because it was indistinguishable from the air I breathed. It felt like kindness. It felt like being good. It felt like the responsible management of the impact I had on others. It was none of those things. It was fear dressed in the clothes of consideration, run so long it had forgotten what it was. The people who received the apologize for version of me across all those years, Robert, Ellen, Joanne, the colleagues at the hospital, the neighbors, everyone were not receiving me. They were receiving the managed presentation of me, the version filtered through the apology, the version that had pre-answered the question, "Is this okay?" before they had a chance to say yes. And saying yes freely, offering something without being required to negotiate the offer, is a different thing from having your reassurance extracted in advance. The people who loved me were, without knowing it, being prevented from loving me plainly. Connie doesn't do this. Connie asks when she needs something and accepts when she doesn't. And the interactions that result are clean in a way mine have never been. I used to think Connie was missing a social sensitivity. She was not missing anything. She had simply arrived by some combination of temperament and experience I don't fully know, at the knowledge that her existence doesn't require advance apology, that she can take up the space she needs without first establishing that the space won't be wasted. I arrived at the same knowledge at 90. From a different direction, via 4 words from my daughter on a Tuesday evening. If you recognize the pattern I'm describing, if you hear yourself saying, "I'm so sorry to bother you," before you've even named the bother, if you find yourself justifying your needs before you've stated them, if the ask is always preceded by the disclaimer, I want to say something directly to you. The people who love you do not need you to apologize before you need something. They signed up for this. They are here. When you apologize before asking, you are not sparing them. You are making the help more complicated, requiring them to manage your self-doubt before they can address the actual need, preventing the exchange from being the simple thing it could be. The apology doesn't make you more considerate. It makes you harder to love clearly. And the posture underneath the apology, the assumption that you are probably an imposition, that your existence needs justification, that you should pre-answer the question of whether you are welcome before anyone has had the chance to welcome you, that posture is costing you something larger than any particular conversation. It is costing you the experience of inhabiting your own life as if you belong in it. And you do belong in it. You have always belonged in it. No apology was ever required. This week, not eventually, notice once in one conversation when the apology comes before the ask. Just notice it, then remove it. Say the plain thing. See what happens. In my experience, what happens is almost always this. The other person simply responds to the need. They don't need to be told first that the need is okay to have. They just need to know what it is. Tell me in the comments, do you recognize this pattern in yourself or in someone you love? Because I ran it for 85 years without knowing I was running it, and I had no idea what it was costing me. And I found out in 4 words from my daughter on an unremarkable Tuesday evening. You don't have to wait 90 years. The plain ask is available right now.